Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Election 2024. All right, lesson 3 is tonight, and it's the healthcare debate. So we have a lot to talk about. Of course, healthcare is a huge topic, huge topic. I know we have some doctors with us this evening, and feel like healthcare is one of those issues that is a constant conversation, healthcare debate, healthcare reform. And the question is, and the question is a constant one, which is what is the best system? And there are many ways in which we could look at this question, look at the problem, the question of healthcare and healthcare reform. Tonight, we're going to explore a uniquely Jewish perspective on what I would call the responsibility of healthcare. And I think it's important right at the beginning to differentiate between, I would say, more of a secular or US type of approach in general to a lot of issues versus a Jewish approach. And if you've taken classes with me before, this piece of it is going to sound familiar on some level because it comes up in so many different contexts. In the US, the system of law, governance, and really the society is based on a system of rights. The US is a rights-based system. So people have, there's a Bill of Rights, right? We have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I think it is, right? Pursuit of happiness. We don't have a right to happiness, by the way. We have a right to pursue happiness, but that is, and these are very fundamental, important rights. So if, for example, in the realm of healthcare,
we don't even have those rights. Those are in the Declaration of Independence, but not in the Constitution.
Interesting. You're saying those aren't legal?
No, that's no.
Who would have thought? Interesting. But we are very much a rights-based system. So, for example, in healthcare, because that is tonight's topic, good to see you, good evening. Hey, guys. In the realm of healthcare, a big piece of it is patient autonomy, right? So you go in and you sign all these, HIPAA, you sign all these forms that basically say, that give consent under certain circumstances, but otherwise, your privacy, your health information is locked down. Your health, your choice, your decisions, etc. By and large, that's the way the system works. So it's all about rights and autonomy, etc. Judaism in general, again, generally speaking, has a different system altogether. It's not a system of rights. It's a system of obligations or responsibilities. And I'm going to close the door so we have a little bit more clarity. Be right back. Not that a door gives us more clarity about responsibilities, but it does help with the ambient sound. So when it comes to Judaism, and this is the example that I'm sure if you've heard me talk on these topics before, you've probably heard me use this example, the 10 Commandments aren't a series of rights. You have 10 rights. As a parent, you have the right to be respected. No. It's about obligations. The 10 Commandments, right? The Torah says, you must honor your parents, right? It talks about observing the Shabbat. Do not murder, do not steal, do not, etc. The Torah says, do this, don't do that. It doesn't say you have the right to X, Y, or Z. It's a completely different system. Two different modalities. And the goal here is not to discuss which is better, which is worse, because that's not the goal of this series. The goal of the series is not to say, if America adopted Jewish law halacha, can you imagine what America would look like? That's not the objective. The objective is, because I don't know that that's in anyone's interest, right, to make America run by halacha. That's not at all what we're talking about. What we are talking about in this series is understanding how we might apply some Jewish ideas, Jewish wisdom, Jewish perspectives that might lend a little bit of common sense to some issues that are otherwise hotly contested. And that's what we're going to do tonight. So again, the first fundamental kind of piece of framework that I want to lay out is the difference between a rights-based system versus a responsibilities-based system. Judaism and Torah is not about rights, it's about responsibilities. And therefore, a lot of stuff comes up, as we'll see tonight. So what we're going to do tonight is look at the core question of who should be responsible for healthcare. It sounds like a basic question, but it's hotly debated. I mean, this is at the core, I think, of a lot of the question. Who should be responsible? Is it the individual or is it society? Or maybe is it the individual or is it the government? Who should be responsible? And when I say responsible, I mean who should be worried about it? Who should pay for it, right? Is this something that should be a collective service that's provided, universal healthcare, and somehow that's the mechanic, people pay in or whatever, or they don't, or they pay in somehow through taxes or premiums, or should it be left up to the individual? Though that's typically how the discussion is framed. And when if what was it, the Affordable Health Care Act? Is that what it was called? I think that's what it was called, aka Obamacare, right? Affordable Health Care.
Affordable Care Act.
Affordable Care Act. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I had an extra health in there. Right. So the Affordable Care Act. So when that was passed, the idea was everyone, giving access, everybody can get health care. And, again, in concept, this is a great thing. Everyone should get health care. Everyone's paying in, but then you have the tax. So now you have competing values. So should everybody get it or should everyone have the freedom to either get it or not to get it? So now you're robbing people potentially of the freedom to not have it by taxing people essentially, or maybe it's not a tax, anyway, that's where the politics comes in. But tonight we're going to look at the core question. Who's responsible for healthcare? Who should be responsible? Who's on the hook? Who's not on the hook for health? And so what we're going to do is look at this topic from A to Z, nuts and bolts. I have, I'm going to put this up on the screen as well. I have prepared 12 pages, 22 different texts. By the way, 22 texts, way more than 22 texts, because many of them have like A, B, C, multiple texts per number. We have here a series of texts that go through this topic from top to bottom. And I think a lot of this is going to be very illuminating. So we begin with our opening question. Let me pull this up on the screen. Give me a second, guys. We pull this up. Sorry, we start off with the opening question. Okay, and the opening question is very simple. Who is most responsible for paying for my healthcare? The government, my employer, or myself? Okay, seems like a very basic question, but let's discuss this for a second, right? Who is most responsible for paying for my healthcare? The government, my employer, or myself? What do you think? Oh, okay, good question. Theoretically, yeah.
It's different. I answer if it's health care, as in terms of if I'm sick, what I need to do to get well again, versus the cost and the responsibility for your health, right? Since a lot of healthcare costs are incurred as downstream effects of behavioral, aspects of health. The people exercise,
smoke, etc.
Smoke.
So you're saying that maybe health should be something that's more government or societal, but health care for the individual, or maybe the language doesn't really matter, but you're saying that. Okay.
Right. That some of those, and of course there are other all sorts of conditions that aren't behavioral, but a lot of it, a lot of downstream costs get incurred basically choices that people make related to their health. So it seems like it's more of an individual responsibility.
Okay, good. What do you?
There's like systemic limitations to get like healthy foods or have.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Right. So if somebody can't get it, if someone for whatever reason, so then you're almost saying it's society's fault. Let's just say it like that. They should pay for it. Why should I pay for it if I'm living in an area? Well, what was that? Flint, Michigan, right? If I'm living in Flint, Michigan, and there's no clean water, now I have health issues, right? So why is that now my problem? Now I got to pay for that. That doesn't sound right. Oh, Joe, jump in. Oh, hold on, you're muted.
Oh, I think it's a false choice, because I think in the last analysis, I'm paying in all three cases. So I mean, if the government's paying, the government's paying it through the taxes that I'm paying. If it's my employer, this is just part of my total comp package. The fact that my employer is paying for it, so it's they have a choice of paying me cash or helping to pay for my healthcare, or I'm paying for it for myself. I don't see this as necessarily a
Okay.
choice among the three.
Let me repeat to make sure. So Joel's saying you're paying for it either way, right? It's either coming out of your salary, either you're paying for it out of pocket.
That's why I said myself, but in the end, we all have to pay, or anyone who can has to pay, whether out of pocket to insurance or to government taxes.
Right.
In the end,
You're saying either way, on some level, we're paying for it. It's either coming from out of our pocket or before it hits. Right. Okay.
I mean, another maybe, but a different question would be, who's responsible for paying for my neighbor's healthcare?
Which we'll get to, which we will get to tonight. Good. And we're going to ask that question, actually. Chuck, did you have something?
Government has tremendous influence. Question, they can influence the cost by the requirements we put on the providers.
Right. You're saying that there can be societal influences or governmental influence on the providers of medicine that kind of move prices up and down and.
And because of that, in order for me to provide the same health care to my employees, and you're talking about technicians and people, they're not wealthy people, the cost of that premium went up 80%, not 80%.
You're saying you were covering healthcare. I'm going to repeat this online for a second, but you're saying you were providing it before, but the switchover just pumped everything up.
Young people are unnecessary. The cost of 80%.
And that hit you.
Not just me, it didn't mean, because we were paying for 60% of the healthcare.
Got it.
The employer was paying 40%. And I can tell you, unless I made some changes, they couldn't afford that.
Right. Okay. So I want to repeat that. So
So that was exactly my experience. Ours jumped by 80%. We pay 60%. And the employees contribute 40%, and it's been the same burden on our practice as well.
Oh, so you guys were able to hear that? Okay, cool.
Well, I heard it.
Our mics are working. Okay, good. No, I don't usually. Okay, that's great. So yeah, I mean that's a good piece of it. That's a good piece of the conversation. So here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna move through this journey, and we're gonna look at various elements, and we're gonna start as I think makes sense. We're going to start from the beginning, which is because we're not looking at this from any other perspective other than a Jewish perspective. We're going to look at biblical text, Talmudic text, Halachic text. That's straight up classic Jewish thought. Now, does Jewish law, does Jewish text speak about specifically this act or this provision? No, it doesn't get so granular, but we're going to get some general perspectives and a framework that I think can be helpful. So we're going to begin with the obligation. Section 1 is the obligation to seek healing. And the core question we're going to ask is, what is the obligation of an individual toward their own health? In general, what is a human being's obligation, or is there an obligation to seek healing? So we're going to begin with text 1a. And the text here is coming from the book of Exodus. Now, this text is shortly after the Exodus from Egypt. And as you'll see, it references the 10 plagues. It begins like this. If you will truly listen to the voice of God, your God, do that which is upright in his eyes, listen to his commandments, and guard all his laws, then God says, I will not afflict you with any of the sickness with which I afflicted Egypt, because I am God, your healer. That's an interesting turn of phrase. God says, basically, if you take care of your end of the covenant, if you take care of your business, I'll take care of my business. And what's my business? I'm in the business of healing. Ki ani Hashem rofecha, because I am God, your healer. Now, one might think, based on this text, that where does healing come from? Right? One might presume, and one might conclude based on this, that healing comes from God Almighty. And that's the source of healing, which means that maybe we should not be seeking medical help. We should rather be seeking a prayer book, a siddur, a prayer book, go to synagogue, pray, say Mishaberach, etc., do a mitzvah in order to create healing. That is what the implication might be. However, we look a few chapters later, 6 chapters later, Exodus 21, and it paints a different picture. Now, this is in the Torah portion of Mishpatim. This text comes from the Torah portion called Mishpatim, which is actually my bar mitzvah Torah portion. For what it's worth, I don't know that that's worth that much, but just, I remember this verse well. And it talks about a situation where somebody assaults someone else and causes physical harm and damage, like injury. And the Torah provides for the outcome for this case. Text 1b. If he should get up from his sickbed and walk about outside. So we're talking about somebody who strikes someone, and the victim, right, not the assailant, but the one who was assailed, is able to get up, is not, God forbid, killed. But this person gets up from a sickbed and walks about outside, even with a cane, then he, the assailant, must pay him for the idle time and to make sure he is healed. So the Torah provides for multiple forms of what we might call damages. Number 1, idle time. What's idle time? Lost wages. Exactly, missed work. Idle time. Guy can't go to work for 2 weeks because you sucked, because you punched him. Yeah, you got to pay for that. That's lost wages. And you have to make sure that he's healed. What does that mean? Take a look at text 1c. Rashi comments, make sure he is healed. As the Aramaic translation reads, it says Rashi, and he shall pay the doctor's fee. If you assault someone else, first of all, don't do that. But if it happens, right, someone assaults someone else, God forbid, then the Torah says you got to pay for lost wages and you got to take care of the medical bills. You have to pay the doctor's fee. Now, this is fascinating because this implies that there's a thing called doctors, which goes against, it seems to go against what we read in text 1a, where God says, I'm the doctor, I'm the healer. Yeah.
Just before we go on to the next page, the context, the first thing I always read that is, I won't bring darkness, light, it seems like
The plaguey stuff, right? I want to repeat that just in case. So Mitch is saying that, hold on, text 1a doesn't necessarily say don't go to a doctor. It just says that if you follow these things, I'm not going to bring like plague and doom and gloom upon you. And that is, so you are correct. And the way we know that, because somebody could take this out of context and say, well, God says he's the healer. Let me just pray and not show up, to my medical appointments. So the reason that we know that that's not what it means, that the explanation is like what you're saying and not like what somebody meant, is because of the subsequent text. Because we have another verse that clearly says you got to pay for medical. Now, hold on. Why are there medical bills? Shouldn't you be just praying to God and getting healed? And the answer is no, you go to a doctor and the guy has to pay the medical bills, and that's something that needs to happen. Take a look at the Talmud. If you turn the page, and I will scroll here for a moment.
I really never said we had to pray.
No, correct. Correct, right. It wasn't a provision of prayer. Correct, right. God doesn't say there, if you pray to me, then I'll heal you. Correct. Text 2a. The school of Rabbi Ishmael taught. It's from the Talmud Tractate Bava Kama. So the school of Rabbi Ishmael taught, make sure he is healed. V'rapo yirapeh. Let me just clarify something. At the end of the verse that we read in text 1b, right, the guy has to pay for his idle time and to make sure he is healed. In the Hebrew, make sure he is healed is a bit of an English adaptation. In the Hebrew, it's v'rapo yirapeh. Now, if you know a little Hebrew, or even if you don't, v'rapo yirapeh sounds like the same word twice in slightly different formulation. V'rapo yirapeh, again, same word. It means healing. And heal, he shall be healed, or you have to provide healing for his healing. So that's why the translation is make sure he's healed, which means if you repeat the word heal twice, it means, make sure he's healed and not that he's not healed. So says the Talmud, make sure he's healed, v'rapo yirapeh. From this doubling of the verb, I'm reading text 2a, from this doubling of the verb, we learn that divine permission has been given to the doctor to heal. There's a very famous Talmudic passage. We had it recently in another course that I taught, but basically the Talmud says, from here we learn, from here it's clear. In case anyone ever had an issue with medicine, in case anyone had an issue with doctors who says If God injures, who gives permission to a human being to intervene, etc.? Here we have this idea, this notion that divine permission has been given to the doctor to heal. What's incredible is text 2b. And even when I've taught these ideas in other contexts, I don't think we've ever gotten into text 2b, because text 2b, and I have to explain before we read inside, I need to set this up properly. Think about it. The source of the doctor in Torah is in which case? It was text 1b from Mishpatim, from Exodus 21. What was the context of that case? When did the Torah say that you have to pay the medical bills? What was the context? How did it happen? There was an assault. Now, I'm going to use terms. This may not be the correct medical way to talk about it, but internal illness versus external injury. When you're deep, one could have said, this is brand new. We haven't talked about this yet. One might have said the following. When it's illness brought on by God, maybe then God should, let me start the other way. When it's injury caused by man, so then caused by humans, then humans should also do the healing. Then we have doctors. But what if an illness is brought upon by God Almighty? Well, then maybe if God brings it, God has to cure it. In other words, who are we to intervene? Take a look at text 2b. Divine permission has been given, says Tosfot. Tosfot, a collection of sages that were compiled that joined together to write a commentary on the Talmud, and they write the following: divine permission has been given. One might raise the question that this could have been learned without the doubling from the simple meaning of healing. The answer is, in other words, why does the Torah have to say v'rapo yirapeh twice, heal? It could have just said make sure he's healed, just say it once. And that would teach us about the medical bills, etc. So why does it repeat it twice? The answer is that the simple meaning covers only an injury caused by another human, which is the context of the Torah's case. But we would still not have permission to heal illnesses and injuries coming from heaven, for it would seem as if we were contradicting the decree of the king. This doubling, therefore, teaches that this is not so. In other words, although one could argue theoretically that the Torah only allows permission to heal in the context of injury caused by another human. So if they're healthy, otherwise, and then someone goes along and injures them, well, then you go to a doctor. But what if somebody, God forbid, gets sick, not due to any other human intervening or causing that injury? Then we might say, well, that case, doctors should not get involved. And you should know that there are some, it's not widespread, but there is definitely at least one opinion from the early commentaries that actually says, no, I see that there's a difference. Only external injury, we go to doctors, but internal illness, let God take care of that. But this is not the mainstream. It's just one opinion. We see clearly that Tosafot says this, explains that this is what the Talmud means. That's his understanding of the Talmud. And this has become mainstream, that doctors not only have permission, but because they have permission, they therefore must heal not just injury caused by another human on human injury, but also what we might call divine illness, i.e. things that are not man-made. Joel, did you want to jump in?
This might be a question for another day, and please tell me if it is, but under what circumstances does God bring illness or injury to humans? I'd always understood that God may not intervene to stop someone from being injured or sick, depending on the circumstances, but that God doesn't intervene in that particular way to cause illness or injury.
You're asking a good question, but I think what you're saying is the same thing that they're saying. In other words, whether you call it God brings it or God didn't stop it, it just means that no other human being visibly punched the other guy and knocked out a tooth, right? That's like, we're talking about illness.
Okay, you're talking about, okay, all right, fair.
Like internal medicine. I don't know if that's the right term.
Okay.
But like this stuff that's, I don't know, Cancer, right? It's not.
Excuse me.
Frank.
Frank said before, change smoker life, cancer. You brought out your surgery.
Right. So that's right. So maybe that's what Joel's asking.
Frank, the impure water. Is it you or is it?
Right.
So
Right.
it's like, say God doesn't get anyone sick, you know, we do it to ourselves for each
Katepper is pointing out something right, based on this conversation. What you're saying is that, and again, just putting together a bunch of different pieces of the conversation, is that one could argue that no illness is ever God made, because it's all due to some sort of human behavior, choice, pollution, or whatever it is.
other.
That's probably a mortal condition as well, right? Life itself is a temporary condition. But anyway, but the core, my understanding of the distinction, and I can tell you the commentary. I'm gonna look at my notes here. The commentary that makes this distinction is the Ibn Ezra or Evan Ezra. He writes, I will be your healer from all ills which I decree to be in the world. You will need no doctor, just as with the bitter water none was needed or had the ability to cure. All right, he basically says that if it's internal illness or whatever it is, then we don't go to doctors, but otherwise you go to a doctor for the other stuff. Again, that's not Jewish law, that's not how we roll. And if you're internal medicine, whatever it is, then you're cool. Don't worry. All good. You're not violating God's will. That's a lone opinion, and it's not the majority opinion. But in short, the idea here is that number one, there is, even though God says, I am the healer, but the bottom line is that there is a concept called medicine and doctors. We go to doctors. The Torah says you got to pay the medical bills if you injure someone else. Tosfot says the fact that it says Rabbi Ari paid twice means it's not only if there's medical, it's not only if someone caused the injury, even if however the injury happened or illness happened, no matter under what circumstances, you can go and go to a doctor, and that's not a declaration of going against faith in God and belief that God runs the world and in God's decrees. Because again, the counter argument could have been, well, God decreed that I should be sick. Who am I to intervene? Right? Like, why should I do that? Yeah.
So Rabbi Ari, I don't get exactly. I mean, I get everything, the concept, but I don't see where exactly it is. Where exactly the permission of using it. I see more the division that the permission. How did that? Where do I read to see that? Yes, you can use it.
It says over here,
yeah,
that he's got to pay him and make sure that he's healed.
Yeah.
And the way that's understood pretty much by all the opinions is that means you got to pay the medical bills, which tells us that there's a thing called a doctor and a thing therefore called medical bills. If there wouldn't be doctors, there wouldn't be medical bills. So that's a thing, and it's a thing that has to be paid.
Right.
In fact, Jewish law even says that you don't even give that money, you don't give to the victim. You pay straight to the doctor. Now, how would that work today? I don't know. That would be a little complicated. But Jewish law says actually that you pay to the doctor, the one who assaulted, right? The perpetrator of the violence needs to pay directly to the healer. That's how it works.
And could it be that in this text, in 1b, it doesn't say how the sick person became sick?
No, it definitely does. The text 1b itself doesn't say it, but text 1b is a story. I didn't bring the whole context.
Oh, okay.
If somebody strikes someone else.
Okay, so it's together. Okay.
Yeah, but again, one commentary says there might be a difference between whether someone overtly caused the injury versus they were just sick, but that's not the accepted opinion. Again, the Talmud says, text 2a, that's an important text. Divine permission has been given to the doctor to heal, which is not just permission, but once permission has been granted, it's almost now obligatory. But the theological question still remains, or the philosophical question remains, which is, but why isn't God in control? Which is why we have some more text. So let's take a look. Let's continue on to text 3a. And 3a is a fascinating text that is coming from God's instruction to Noah following the flood. So the flood, they go into the ark, right? They come off the ark, and now God instructs Noah and his family as far as, like, I would call them core commandments or essential themes of life and society. And he talks about how you're not allowed to take a life. You can't take a life. But then God says the following, text 3. Look at this one. But for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. And you can read that verse, and it's actually a verse, a standalone 9:5, Genesis 9:5, and you can read it 1,000 times, and it might not make any sense. But for your own lifeblood, I will require a reckoning. What does that even mean? The commentaries understand this to mean that it's God saying, essentially, don't take your own life. It's about suicide, right? But for your own lifeblood, I will require reckoning, which means God is basically saying, right, I'm going to have a problem. Like, don't take your own lifeblood. So the verses before and after talk about taking someone else's life. Taking someone else's life, not okay. But even for your own lifeblood, also, it's not okay. And why is that? Basically, the following. There is a thing like this, that what can you take? Can you take a possession? Can you take an old shirt and throw it into the garbage? And when I say can you, I know physically you can. Are there any rules against that in the United States? No. Right? It's your shirt. You don't wear it anymore. You're tossing it. Are there any Jewish rules against this? Probably not either. It's an old shirt. You're not interested in it. Okay. What if a person feels the same way about their life? I no longer need it. I no longer find it enjoyable. I no longer am happy with this. Therefore, I'm going to take it and discard it, get rid of it. Here, God says, this, 1 second, time out. This I have a problem with. For your own lifeblood, I will require reckoning. Text 3b explains why. Ezekiel says, now this is not from the 5 books, but it is from the books, from the scripture of the prophets. And Ezekiel says, quoting God, all lives are mine. God says, all lives are mine. Unlike your shirt, which is yours, your life is God's. That's a major distinction that I want to just focus on for a quick moment, because there's a difference between our possessions and our lives. Our possessions, God says, they're yours. Gesundheit, hey, use them in a kosher fashion, right? Nothing illegal, but otherwise, you want to wear it, you don't want to wear it, you want to toss it, you want to keep it, it's up to you. I'm not going to get involved. Oh, that bowl that I used to use for serving, but we don't use it anymore. It doesn't match our new kitchen. We don't need it. We're going to toss it. We're going to donate it. Go for it. No problem. But your life, you say, I no longer like it. I no longer need it. God says, 1 second, slow down. All lives are mine. It's not the same. It's not the same. To clarify this, by the way, I stopped sharing online just for a second because I want to see everybody and not a wall of text on my side. But back to the wall of text, take a look at text 3c. This is the Ritvaz on Rambam. So this is a commentary on Maimonides. And he writes the following, text 3c. A person's life is not his or her own possession, but the possession of the Blessed Holy One, which means that unlike the bowl in your kitchen, unlike the shirt in your closet, your life is not actually yours. Now, it sounds like a radical statement. My life is not mine. Well, whose else is it? We have an answer. The Jewish perspective is that it belongs to God. It's not ours to do with willy-nilly as we wish.
Might it also be saying that we're responsible for taking care of the life that we have, right? As opposed to just discarding it, when ultimately we're no longer. But
Good.
It just seems like this is one of those bill of responsibilities thing.
Correct. Thank you for saying that. Frank is pointing out that herein we see the difference between a system that's based on responsibility versus one based on rights. Judaism doesn't say your life, your right. Do whatever you want with your life. It's your right to do whatever you want with it. Take care of it. Don't take care of it. Keep it. Get rid of it. It's your life. It's your right. Not with life. Maybe with your shirt, yes, but not with your life. With life, now it's not a right. It's a responsibility. It's not like it's yours. Do whatever you want. It's you were given this on trust. You got to be responsible with it. It's like if I gave you a shirt to hold and then give back to me, you couldn't just decide, you know what, we're going to chuck it. That's not okay because it's not yours, it's mine. Our lives still, even as we're living them, our actual life, the neshama, the soul, the life inside of us, that belongs to God, which means that we don't have that choice. To the extent, text 3D, and I know what you're thinking, after text 3D? What about UFC? What about WWE? What about boxing? I don't know. But here's the text 3D. Says halakha, this is code of Jewish law. It is forbidden to strike one's fellow. I mean, that should be obvious, right? You can't injure someone. Even if he gives permission to strike him, no person has any such authority over his own body as to allow it to be struck. And that means even if the guy says, hit me, right? It doesn't matter. You can't. So what do we do? UFC, what are we up to? Like 555, I'm kidding. But UFC, whatever the number is, right? There's a lot of UFC matches, right? They're opting in. They're opting in to hit and be hit. I don't know. I don't know what Jewish law would say about that. You know, maybe if it's your profession, maybe there's a little bit different. That's your money. I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, like, can you be a professional goalie where your job is to absorb 30 shots a game? I know there's a lot of padding. I know, you're actually getting pelted in the ribs every shot, but it could happen also. This would tie into Jewish perspectives on extreme sports, right? And how that would play in, what is the level of risk that one is allowed to subject themselves to, which is not exactly tonight's topic, but it's an interesting topic nonetheless. But the point of all this is to say simply this, that there is a thing in Judaism, in Jewish law, about our lives not being ours, which means that we can't just willy-nilly do whatever we want. And that means that there's some sort of responsibility. And part of this responsibility is that we don't have the permission, because it's not our right. We don't have permission to give permission to allow for injury. I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, I don't think I ever corroborated this, that who's it? Houdini? Harry Houdini? He died because someone punched him. Is this true?
Yeah.
He told someone to punch him?
Well, there's the situation in which he died then is that he wasn't ready for that particular punch.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay.
He usually allowed people, he would say, okay, you can do this. And want you to ruin something.
Right.
But
Interesting.
The person didn't wait.
Got it. All right. Sarika's pointing out that, like, so, it's not all punching is safe punching. And in this case, that was good. So, but in general, the Halachic Jewish law says you can't strike even if permission has been given. Now, we continue with text 4a. We have more text along these lines that, again, are just building this point about personal health responsibility. Text 4a, which is going to tie into healthcare and insurance soon. Text 4a. First of all, we quoted the Hebrew there, which is beautiful. It's actually a little bit of Aramaic. Chamira sakanta me'isur, which means physical danger is a graver issue than mere prohibition. You have to be more careful when it comes to physical danger than even other areas than even what halacha, what Jewish law might say. So, for example, if you go to a meal, like a Shabbat meal, you might notice that there's 2 times that we wash our hands at the meal, right? There's the hand washing before, right before we break bread, we wash the hands. And then there's, before the grace after meals, we do what's called mayim achronim, which is another fingertip washing. Not everyone does this, but it's a tradition that people do. Well, that would depend on if you do the special zimun, if you do the special introduction, kind of the preamble. But even if not, even if it's just you're supposed to rinse the fingers before the grace after meal. And the question is why? And the answer is because back in the day, they used to use a certain type of salt with the food, and that salt, if it got into your eyes, it could be dangerous. And so they said best practice is to make sure you rinse before you close out the meal and forget. Make sure you rinse, make it a ritualized part of the meal. You rinse your fingertips, and then you're good to go. Then you do. So it's like this. Even though that's somewhat of a custom, and the ritual hand washing before bread is a rabbinic mitzvah, chamira sakanta meisura. What if you only had one amount of water? What should you use it for? Should you use it for the mitzvah or for the pre-meal mitzvah of washing the hands, or the post-meal cleansing it from the salt that might be dangerous? Chamira sakanta meisura. Physical danger is more important than prohibition, which means prohibition. No, not that prohibition, but from Jewish law prohibition. Therefore, rather use the water for that which is not a mitzvah, but which is about your health. This stresses again the personal, not just we should take care of our health. Jewish law says a responsibility to take care of our health. It's a necessary thing. Let's continue as we build a case for health, for taking care of our health. Let's take a look at text 4b. Now, this talks about how back in the day, this is a reference to back in the day, bloodletting. Anybody do any bloodletting lately? That used to be a thing. Like leeches. The closest I've ever seen this is, you ever see swimmers, Olympic swimmers? I didn't pay much attention to the recent games. When I say much attention, I wasn't like whatever, but I remember a few years ago, at least, like the top swimmers would have these red circles on their back.
It's called
Right?
cupping.
Cupping, right? They put a cup there, they put it, and it draws the blood to the surface and kind of, I don't know. It's meant to like stimulate activity and strength or whatever it is. But back in the day, they did that with leeches. You put some leeches on, you're good to go. You get the leeches fired up, boom, shakalaka, you're in the game. Text 4b. After Rabbah had let blood, they chopped up a footstool for firewood to warm him. In other words, he let blood, meaning he had his blood leached. So he was, I don't know, when you have less blood, you might be a little colder. So then they chopped up a footstool for firewood. Abaye said to Rabbah, but is the master not violating the prohibition of Baal Tashchit? Baal Tashchit means not destroying something. You took a good footstool, right, and you chopped it up to firewood. It seems like a waste of a good footstool. Rabbi answered, Baal Tashchit, to not destroy something, applies even more to my body than to the footstool. In other words, I have a choice. Which one will I neglect? The footstool or my body? Body comes first. Again, speaking to the responsibility to take care of our health. Text 4c, Maimonides, who, as you know, was also a physician. Maimonides says the following, text 4c, it is a positive Torah command to remove any stuff. Oh, 1 second, let me set this up. Not only are we supposed to respond to injury, illness, etc., by going to a doctor, we're supposed to preempt it. I think somebody mentioned this before, maybe Frank or somebody mentioned this before. The idea that we're meant to be proactive about our health. Text 4c, it is a positive Torah command. This is coming from a doctor, by the way. So understand that he knew what he was talking about. Right? It's a positive Torah command to remove any stumbling block that poses a danger to life, to be watchful of it and be extremely careful of it. As it is said, be very careful and guard your life, nafshecha. Deuteronomy 4:9. Maimonides writes, Rambam says, same guy, Hebrew and English names. So Maimonides says that we have to be proactive about our health and about our wellness. So, which leads to this class. So that's a great question. The short answer is we have to generally speaking, yes, we have to be. There's another issue. When it comes to environment, right? The issue of God puts Adam and Eve into the garden and says, take care of the garden. He didn't say, wreck the garden. So for sure, I think all of our parents taught us when you leave a place, tidy up after yourself, right? At least as nice as when you got there, if not even a little bit nicer. That's just good practice. But that's not going to be one of the topics, but it's still an interesting thing. Yeah. Take a look at the discussion question that I have up there. Okay. Who is being addressed by the command that we just read? Be very careful and guard your life in nafshecha. Who is being given the responsibility to do this? The individual, the community, or both? When the Torah says, "What? Be careful, guard your life, take care of your life." Who's the Torah addressing? The community or the individual? What do you think?
I think the individual first, but the community is wrong.
Okay, so 1 second. So the direct implication of the verse and all of these texts, the direct implication is God is telling us individually to be careful, not just to be careful, but to be mindful of our health, to be responsible for our health and well-being, not to be the one that puts ourselves in reckless situations, not to be the one that says, hit me, right? Not to be the one that doesn't take reasonable steps to safeguard our health, etc. The Torah says, you be the one to take care of yourself, which means that it might it might seem based on all of this, and I'm not saying might because it's not going to, but it reasonably can be said that these texts are all pointing to the same core idea, which is that although God runs the world and we believe in God and all that good stuff, great, but God is saying, you believe in me? Great, you're going to listen to me? Good. You know what I'm telling you? Take care of your health. God could do it. He gave it to us. He could also make bread. But guess who has to make bread if you want to eat bread? You got to eat bread, right? You want sourdough bread? It's going to take 2 days now. My wife started making sourdough bread recently. It's fantastic. But it does take a few days. Anybody make sourdough? Yeah? You make sourdough? Yeah? Exactly. So you and I are in the same boat. I eat, I don't make it. It involves every 30 minutes. I'm sure there's different methods. You have to stretch and fold. Sometimes my wife is waking up at 3 a.m. She's got to deal with it. It's like, it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing. It's incredible. So what's my point? My point is like this. Yeah, could God have made bread for us? Sure, but he doesn't. He says, you want to eat? Make some food, right? Make lunch or buy lunch, figure it out. When it comes to our health, God says, I'm the healer. Could I heal everybody? Make sure no one's sick? Sure, but I'm giving that responsibility. Again, responsibility, not a right, responsibility to you. Text 5a. Next text, building the case for who is responsible for health. Text 5a. A scholar, says the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin, a scholar is forbidden to live in any town that does not have these 10 things. How come no one tells anybody this? You know, I get all these, you see articles every once in a while, like top 10 places to live. And they say why. It's like, why? Oh, there's a river running through it. It's beautiful, at cost of living, but no one ever says it hits all 10 boxes from the Talmud Tractate Sanhedrin, 17b. They probably should do that. Here we go. Text 5a. A scholar is forbidden to live in any town that does not have these 10 things. Number 1, a court. I'm going to stop counting, but you'll count yourself. A court, a charity fund, a synagogue, a bathhouse. This is before plumbing was everywhere. A latrine, a doctor, a bloodletter, a scribe, a kosher butcher, and a teacher of children. These are your top 10 criteria. What's a latrine? That's a bathroom, right? Yeah, it's a toilet. Okay, good. That's what I thought. So look at this list. No, right. They didn't have, it's not like, oh yeah, down the hall, the first door on the left. You'll notice that it's got the burgundy walls with the cool mirror. And that's not what they were talking about, right? This is probably some other provision that they had for themselves. But if you look at this list of top 10 features, how many are health related? How many can you discover here? Can you discern that are health related? What do you think?
Tree, doctor,
Kosher butcher.
Charity fund.
I have 5. Oh, it could be. Charity fund could be. I found 5 things that are health related. Bathhouse, latrine, doctor, bloodletter, and butcher. Right? How? And could be charity fund also. But 5, I think, directly related. A bathhouse, hygiene, latrine, health and hygiene, doctor, health, bloodletter, health, kosher butcher, health, right? You got to eat. You got to eat well. You got to eat healthy. By the way, kosher butchers were way more, still important, still cool, but way more important before refrigeration, right? You want to have fresh meat? You got to have a butcher. Hey, I went to the butcher last week. Don't eat that meat, right? 1,000 years ago. I don't know what was going on 1,000 years ago, unless you lived in a very cold climate, right? What were you doing in ancient Israel 2,000 years ago with meat, huh? Oh, okay. There you go. Beef jerky. A little, what do they call it in South Africa? What is it called? Biltong. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. Back to the story. Text 5b. Says Maimonides, Hilchot Deot, in his Code of Jewish Law, he writes the following. Since maintaining a healthy and sound body is among the ways of God, for one cannot understand or have any knowledge of the Creator if he is ill, therefore he must avoid that which harms the body and accustom himself to that which is healthful and helps the body, becomes stronger. Again, Maimonides with his preventative health. Very forward thinking, right? We have now like social programs, ideas of like preventative health and wellness, and let's get into communities and explain how to live healthy lifestyles and not, take out the things that are unhealthy. And Maimonides, who lived, I don't know, a little less than 1,000, maybe 900 years ago, he's writing, yes, this is not only good health practice, this is almost a religious, not almost, it's a responsibility. It's a Jewish responsibility. Like it's among the ways of God, because you cannot serve God. You cannot study. You can't do anything if you're sick. So therefore, this now becomes a religious mandate to take care of health. It's interesting how he frames it.
Cigarettes.
It's very interesting. So you're mentioning cigarettes. It's very interesting. There's been many. Yeah, it's fascinating because when the health concerns about cigarettes came out, there was a discussion amongst rabbis about should there be a formal rabbinic proclamation about it or not. Famously, the previous Rebbe who was an avid smoker. When he heard of whenever wave of don't smoke came out, he quit cold turkey and never smoked again. Some rabbis have over the years spoken about it. Most have not. As far as why not, if again, assuming that it's clear, the clear health risks, etc., and assuming that halacha is concerned about that piece of it as well, because it does impact the religious part. Because you could say, well, halacha is not going to tell you to wear a seatbelt, but if it affects health, then maybe it should also. As far as why not, I don't know. It would be a good question. Maybe they thought that those that are not going to listen, it's not good to say, or you could say that's the reason to actually say it. Because anyway, it's a good question. You're asking a good question. Discussion question of have these readings changed your mind to reinforce your earlier thoughts? Again, the intention of that is, okay, do you think it's healthcare is a communal responsibility or individual responsibility? It's clear from all the texts we've cited thus far that there is an individual responsibility to care for our health. However, if that were the whole class, you would wonder what happened to the last half hour. No need to wonder, because section 2 is about my brother's keeper. Not my brother's keeper, that's another class, my brother's keeper. So what is my brother's keeper? This is about now our communal responsibility or responsibility for the other guy. Are we obligated, discussion question for this section is, are we obligated to heal others or help them care for their health? So now we know, because again, Torah doesn't speak of, Jewish law doesn't speak in terms of rights. That I established from the beginning. It's about responsibility. So now we know I have a responsibility for my health. That is clear. It's clear. You have allegedly 5 texts. We had probably so far 10, 12 or more texts. Again and again and again, take care of your health. From every angle, it's a responsibility. However, what is my responsibility to your health? Do I have a responsibility? Let's say something, God forbid, happens to someone else. Do I need to step in or do I not need to step in because it's not my fault? It's their responsibility. Is everyone an island, or are we also now collectively responsible? Text 6a. And we're going to analyze this from a Talmudic perspective. We're going to quote a few verses and then jump into the Talmud, and it's fascinating. Okay, so stay with me because we're going to have to do some thinking. Text 6a, here's a verse, 2 verses from Deuteronomy. You should not watch your brother's ox or sheep stray and turn a blind eye. Return them, rather, to your brother. But if your brother is not near to you, or if you do not know him, you should bring it into your house, and it should remain with you until your brother seeks it out, and then return it to him. This is called the mitzvah of Hashavas Aveda, the mitzvah of returning lost objects, which means if you see something, do something. I know I'm like paraphrasing, right? If you see something, you got to step in. You can't say, not my issue, not my ox, not my circus. You can't, again, paraphrasing, you can't say that. You got to step up and step in. And it means you take the ox. Imagine you're collecting oxen. I need an ox in my house like a hole in the head. Somebody lost, there was an ox owner, just not owners, but straying ox, like, oh, I got to take care of it. I got to schlep this to my house, hold it, announce it, print up flyers. Are you kidding me? Have you lost this ox? I mean, thank God for Nextdoor app. But like, what was that? What were we doing, right? Before Nextdoor, now we got to schlep oxen into our house. By the way, this is a Torah responsibility. It's a mitzvah. Text 6b. Take a look at the next text. This is from the Sifrei. That comments, and then return it to him, says the Sifrei, and it only works in the Hebrew. Because the English, you don't pick up on the nuance. Hebrew's sometimes so subtle, it's loaded with layers of meaning. Says the Sifrei, even he himself you should return. It's not just his ox. If he's lost physically, if he's lost in any other way, but also health-wise, if someone is in danger, if someone is not okay, whatever that means, you now have a responsibility to return him, meaning to help. If you see something, you got to help. Not just his ox, but himself. Let's continue. We have another verse. So that was Deuteronomy. There's another verse in Leviticus. Leviticus 19. Everyone knows this. Do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood. Says Rashi 7b, do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood and watch him die when you are able to save him. That means very simply that if you see somebody in trouble, you have to intervene. So now the Talmud is going to jump in. I told you, we're a few verses in the Talmud. The Talmud has a problem. The Torah doesn't repeat itself. Now you have two verses that tell us the same thing. The Torah says, return the lost object, which we learned is not just the lost object, but help out your fellow, even personally, right? Physically, whatever. And then we have another verse that says, don't stand by their blood, which also means to help them. Why do I need both? And in fact, the Talmud prefers not the one standing, not that don't stand by your fellow's blood. The Talmud actually prefers the ox returning verse, because that one's like a 2-for-1 special, because you learn both about the ox and about the owner in the same one fell swoop. The one about not standing by the blood, I only know that if he's dying to step in. But the other one implies so much more. I have to return the ox. I have to help him out. Maybe even finance. Like who knows? It's way more. It's way more elaborate. Text 8a. I'm just setting this up to be clear because the Talmud jumps in. And by the way, this is kind of like a direct quote from the Talmud. So it's going to be written in Talmudic style. So stick with me. I'm going to explain so no one should get lost here. From where do we know that if one sees one's fellow drowning in a river, a wild beast ravaging him, or bandits coming to attack him, that he is obliged to save him? Scripture states, do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood, but rather save him from death. Good. But is it so? So the Talmud asks a rhetorical question and gives an answer. How do we know that you got to step in and help your buddy, help your tzugazun? If they're in danger, don't stand by their fellow's blood. You got to step in. Great. Beautiful, says the Talmud, continues. But is it indeed, and for any lawyers amongst us, any lawyers, Joel, I'm looking at you. Kidding,
Yes.
right? No, I'm not kidding. You'll love this, even if you're not a lawyer. You'll love this. Ask the Talmud, now you know why there's so many Jewish lawyers. Says the Talmud, 2,000 years ago, they were thinking about this stuff. But is it indeed, says the Talmud, but is it indeed from here that this law is derived? Surely not. The law is derived from a verse in this other place. The Torah clearly states that a lost object must be returned to its owner. But where do we know that we must return a lost body, i.e. that if a life of a fellow Jew is in danger, there's an obligation to save him? Scripture states, and then return it to him. And that was text 6a and text 6b. That was the first of the two texts that we had. Now, says the Talmud, concluding its question, if this verse from Deuteronomy teaches that one must save his fellow's life, then why would the verse in Leviticus, do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood, be teaching the same thing? In other words, it's redundant. If you have the verse that tells you to return the ox, which also means to help the guy also, well then, if he's in danger, then why do you need the one about not standing by his blood? It's the same verse. It's repeated. It's redundant. Says the Talmud, if we would have learned this law from there about returning the ox, then I would have said that obligation is only when he himself can save his fellow's life. But if he could only save his life by hiring a rescuer, then I would say that one is not required to do so. In other words, if all I had was the verse about seeing your neighbor's ox go astray, step in and help, then I would think that my obligation to help the person, the owner of the ox as well, if he's in danger, would only be if I could help him. How do I know that that even if I can't help, that I'm on the hook to spend money to save someone else? Now you might be thinking, well, who said? That's exactly what the Talmud is asking. Is that a thing or is that not a thing? Says the Talmud. Therefore, we have the other verse from Leviticus. Therefore, this verse in Leviticus, do not stand idle by your neighbor's blood, comes to teach us that he must even hire someone to rescue someone in danger. Hire means pay. I'm paying money to save someone else. Again, there's two steps to the obligation. Again, we talk about responsibility in Judaism, not rights. Responsibility to be there for someone else. One level is, if I can help, I'll help. The other one is, I can't help, but I can foot the bill for someone else to help. How do we know that even in that latter case, where I can't, it's not like I can easily help. I would have to hire someone, pay. Let me be very direct here for the topic of today's conversation. How do I know that I should foot someone else's medical bills for them if they can't afford it, but they need the medical care? Because the verse, there's two verses. One says, if you can help, great. The other one says, even if it's going to cost you money. By the way, it's not just because you have two verses, so you just expand the teaching. It's what the verses say. One verse says, step in. Okay, what if I can't? Don't stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood. You know what don't stand by means? Don't do nothing. But I can't help. I didn't say help. I didn't say rescue. I said, don't stand idly. What do you want me to do? You have a credit card? That's literally what Torah is saying, right? You with me on the distinction between the two cases? One says, step in and rescue, but I can't rescue. I'm not a doctor. Okay, but you still can't stand by idly and do nothing. That includes the obligation to pay for it. Now, let's turn the page. Rashi, 8b. Listen, I'm getting obviously all this from the Talmud and Rashi, but Rashi clarifies what I just said. The verse, Rashi gives us the cliff notes. Oh, we should have just read this. The verse, and then return it to him, the Deuteronomy verse, teaches us that one must return the other guy's body to him, meaning help him recover. The verse, do not stand idly by your neighbor's blood, Leviticus, means don't stand by yourself, but pursue every possibility so that your neighbor's blood is not lost, and that includes footing the bill for whatever. Now, based on this discussion question, who is responsible for paying for my health care? The society or my employer or myself? And you don't have to rank anything, but so now you got to ask the question, 1 second. We just said in section A or section 1 of today's class, we had the whole first part of the class was my health, my responsibility. Now we're saying that I don't just have a responsibility for myself. I now have a responsibility for you also to make sure that you're okay. So how do we rank who's responsible? How do we triage this when it comes to me? Am I responsible for myself or are you responsible for me? And if you're responsible for me, does that let me off the hook for being responsible for myself? Does that make sense? Can I say I don't need to foot my own bill because someone else has the obligation to do it for me? Or do I have to do it? Where do we draw the line? May seem like an obvious question or an elementary question, but nonetheless, one that is going to help us move this further. Text number 9. Again, Code of Jewish Law. One who sees his fellow drowning in the sea or being set upon by gangsters, if he can save him personally or by hiring others to save him, then he's obligated to go to the trouble to hire people to save him. He may afterwards require reimbursement for his expenses if the one saved has the money. And that answers the question. Who's responsible to pay for it? Well, but also in the moment, the guy's drowning. He can't pull out his credit card. Right? Take it easy. What do you want him to do? He's like, hold on. I had a quarter in my pocket. The guy's, God forbid, drowning. You gotta step up. Well, who's paying for it? You pay for it. But after he's saved, he's got to pay for it. In other words, when we talk about who's responsible for health, the answer is still the individual, number one. It's only if in a moment that they can't, etc., that you then go to number two, the other person, but then it still goes back to number one. Let's continue. He may afterwards require, I'm going to reread that middle sentence again. He may afterwards require reimbursement for the expenses if the one saved has the money. Oh, if not, he should nonetheless not refrain from saving. It's double negative. If he does refrain, he is guilty of violating the prohibition of do not stand either by your neighbor's blood. Let's say you know the guy doesn't have a penny to his name. Say, I'm going to spend all this money to save him. I'm never going to see the money back. Forget it. I'm out. I'm out. Nope. You still can't stand idly by your neighbor's blood. You still have to help, even if it costs you money. So now we have a bit of a picture here. So let's put the picture together, because we're learning here. Second, we're getting a bit of a system. So when it comes generally speaking, we have to foot our own bill. We're responsible for our own healthcare. Go to the doctor, pay for it, etc. Great. If someone else is in need, and it's a pressing need, etc., then another person has the responsibility to take care of, and not only physically, personally take care of, but to pay for whatever expenses to help this person be okay. But afterwards, they can go back to that person that they help and ask for the reimbursement. If they have, great. If not, then you still have to do that mitzvah. And that is now the responsibility. That's where the collective comes in. So it begins with their individual responsibility, but then there is also the collective. But the question is, when there is this collective responsibility, or let's say responsibility for the other as our brother's keeper, does that fall on the one or the many? Somebody sees someone drowning, or someone's in a difficult spot, forget drowning, whatever, and the only way they can make it is with X amount of expense. You got to pay it, right? What if and then you send the bill? But what if the guy can't pay it? Then you're on the hook for it. Well, who should be on the hook for it? You're on the hook for it? That's the question. Is it the one who noticed? Is it the one who raised their hand first? Because one could ask the question, why is it that person any more than anyone else in the neighborhood or in the community or in the society or in the country? And the question is, and how far do you expand that? In other words, am I responsible? The guy's drowning, God forbid. And it's going to require, I don't know, drowning doesn't usually require money, but whatever. Let's say I can only hire someone who's a really good swimmer, but he's like, hey, bro, I charge money. I charge money for rescues, right? Imagine the lifeguards, but it's a pay-per use thing, right? Imagine a scenario like that. Right? So I shell out, it's like $1,000 per rescue. I lay out the money, they rescue him, now go back to that guy. Turns out that guy has nothing, has no money. So now I'm out $1,000. I'm like, y'all were standing on the beach also. Why am I the one taking that? Oh, because you're the loser that said, hey, let's help this guy. Is that how it works? Is there someone who just takes the hit for everyone? Let's continue to take a look at text 10. Let's take a look at text 10. This is also a very important piece of the equation. Again, it all ties into, you'll see soon, it all ties into insurance. Because insurance is everyone's paying into the system. It's a collective thing. We are all for one, etc. Text 10, halacha specifies that if there is only one doctor, he is required to heal those who cannot pay. And rather than expend public charities, we may legally compel the doctor to heal without pay. However, if there is more than one doctor in a place, then it is impossible to cast the burden of providing medical care without fee on one doctor more than on another. Accordingly, next page, the right thing to do is either for the congregation to pay the fee from tzedakah funds, or to take up a collection for the required amount, or for the congregation and its bet din, its court system, to set up a rotation during which each doctor will cover for free according to the need, each in his turn. And when the congregation has greater ability, the best way is for it to set up a set monthly wage for a doctor who will take on at no charge. The poor of the congregation will come with documentation identifying him as someone who is unable to pay. And how good and fine are those sick care funds and their widely varying sorts, which we have seen here in our Holy Land. They symbolize in a united way the three great traits by which our people are distinguished and by which we are identified: compassion, humility, and practical benevolence. And my friends, this was the Tzitz Eliezer of Eliezer Waldenberg, who was a rabbi, one of the great rabbis, halachic authorities in the land of Israel, who wrote this shortly after the establishment of the state of Israel in 1948, 1947, 48. And here we have this psak, or this proclamation, and it says the following. Yes, if there's one doctor, the doctor can't say, I'm not going to help this person. You're the only one that can step up. You have to step up. You can't let people die because why me? Why me? Because you're the only guy. But if there's more than one doctor, now the doctor can say, why me? Why not the other guy? And now you're right. So now there's either rotation or there's a fee or there's a fund that should pay. And he says, ideally, yeah, that's what happens. You establish a fund so as to allow healthcare for those that can't afford it. And it's amazing that even today, there are communities, typically larger Jewish communities, in which there are real systems in place. And when I say real, I mean like legit systems in place to provide healthcare at either free or severely, like heavily reduced, subsidized costs for community members that are in need. I'm aware of one in Chicago. I don't believe that Atlanta has this. Atlanta has other chesed funds and other charitable organizations and funds, et cetera, that help and provide and services, et cetera. But I know Chicago, because my kids have gone to school, to high school there. They have specifically, there is a center. It's like what we would call here, as if Chicago's not here, but like what do they call these places? Like
Public health.
What do they call urgent care? It's like an urgent care, right? Like an urgent care. They have doctors and PAs that come in that essentially donate their time to the community. And they come in and there's enough, it's a big enough community that people donate, X amount of hours and whatever. And I'm sure it's subsidized. Their hours are donated, also subsidized to some extent, but they facilitate care for the community, for those that can't afford or can't pay at all, that there's a system to provide healthcare. And according to halacha, this is the right way to do it. Now, it doesn't, not that we're pulling responsibility from the individual. What we're saying is if an individual can't, then it is now a responsibility for those that can't. And the question is, so who has a responsibility? And the answer is, ideally, everybody in the community, everybody in that group has responsibility. So if we think about it and we think about the question of an employer, for example, and I know Joel pointed out that it's going to come out from, one way or another, maybe it's all the same money pockets, whatever. But the question of should an employer be responsible for footing the bill for an employee's health care, the Jewish answer is not necessarily. Because just because someone's giving you a job, what makes them more responsible for your health as opposed to the entire community / society? Just because they give you, just because they've hired you and pay you, why now are they responsible for the totality of your being when that is a burden? If somebody can't pay, that is shouldered by the other. And we said, who is the other? All of the others, not one individual. And so that's an interesting twist that rises from a Jewish framework that is responsibility based and not rights based, in which number one, the responsibility begins individually. It then is extended to the other, responsible for the other in need. But that other is all of the others and not just one person. So when we think about, again, this idea, the system where it's almost obligated on the one who is otherwise providing other benefits to this person, it's Jewish law would have, or Jewish framework would have perhaps a different perspective on that. It's interesting to keep in mind. Questions, comments? Yeah.
Because the employers weren't part of the formula to the United States.
What do you mean part of the formula? Part of the health care?
Yeah, employers took on that role themselves as a way to draw people into their.
Interesting.
And now people expected it, but it wasn't always the case.
You're saying it was an opt-in thing that then became a thing.
Yes.
I think it was Kaiser Shipbuilding, which had the spin-off of Kaiser Health to track people in Northern California.
Interesting. That is, I didn't know that.
So
That is fascinating. So you're saying it's not like a federally mandated thing.
it wasn't.
It wasn't.
Employees.
Interesting.
I got a question.
But then workers.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. Thank you for that. Larry, hey.
Yeah, on two things. As far as the employer, I think the employer is responsible if the person becomes ill related to his employment.
Yeah, we have just mentioned workers' comp. Yeah, that would be different. Yeah, correct. Good point.
Number two is, I don't know if you discussed it before I got on. What about the community responsibility for something like an illness that could affect the whole community?
Good question. We didn't deal with that directly, but that is a good question. Like, how do we deal with now a situation that's now not an individual issue, but a collective issue? It sounds like that would be handled by the collective as well. And I will tell you this, and this is my standard caveat in these types of conversations. You know, a lot of halakha, a lot of Jewish law, which obviously we're drawing exclusively from Jewish law and Jewish text here. A lot of it is, you know, kind of tested and developed in smaller communities, in a smaller context. You know, applying it to a nation of how many, 350 million people, like it's a little bit of a different, animal, right? So how do you scale that? So not everything can be scaled. So how do you scale that level of personal responsibility in such a large group? Maybe you don't. Maybe you go community by community, or maybe there's a way to do it. But I also don't want to fall into the trap of saying, well, here's a Jewish system. Let's just let's cut and paste it, because that's not what we're talking about. General perspectives and overarching frameworks and kind of ideals. And I think the ideal that's coming up here is, number one, a few things we clearly have spoken about thus far is, number one, personal responsibility. Number two, for our health. Number two, the responsibility that we have to the other in a pressing need situation. Number three, that responsibility kicks back on the individual, because even though in that moment they didn't have the wherewithal to pay, but that doesn't mean that they're therefore off the hook. They have to, at a later point in time, be responsible for that. If they still can't, then the responsibility still kicks back on the other. But who's the other? The one person who was next to them, or the larger collective? The answer would be the larger collective. Now, what about a situation where a person says, great, I have responsibility for my health, etc., but my life, my choice, I don't want to. I don't want to get involved. I don't want to buy insurance. I don't want to. I'm opting out. Is that kosher? Is that okay? And if somebody does say that, do you still have to help them? You with me on this? What if somebody says, I don't want to, I don't care, but your health, I don't care. So then I'll pay for you, whatever you want, but I'm not paying you back. So then what do you do? Right? Again, this all ties into like people paying or not paying into a system that will take care of them, etc. So how does that work? So now we continue with the next few texts. Text number 11a. And again, we're talking about donkeys and animals because, hey, that's a popular context of the Torah, and yet we can apply it to other cases. If you see your neighbor's donkey collapsing under its burden, should you hesitate to help him? No, you must certainly help along with it. So you can't ignore it. See something, do something. The animal is suffering under its burden, you got to step in. Text 11b. If your neighbor goes and sits down and says to you, it's you who are commanded to help because of text 11a, right? If you see your neighbor, right? Torah just says you have to help. What if the guy who owns the donkey says, hey, can you help? Because I'm going to sit down while you help, because the Torah says you have to help. So I'm just going to sit down. No. Then you may unload the donkey or not, as you wish, for scripture says along with him. In other words, the with him, yeah, that's a little bit specific. You're supposed to help him. Sorry, you're supposed to help with him, not if he sits down and grabs a beer and says, you got the mitzvah. Yeah, I got the mitzvah to help you, or to help with you, and not to do it for you. It would seem. Text 11c, this is one opinion, actually, not the, I don't even want to read it. Because it's not the final opinion, it's one opinion. Basically says somebody doesn't want to be helped, we don't help them, but that's not what we physically, health-wise, but that's not what we rule. So, and in the interest of time, we're going to skip that because it's going to pull us of a non-halachic tangent, as it were. So text 12a, as we read before, is repeating this text that we had about not striking one's fellow even with permission, which means that a person doesn't really have the option to opt out of their health because it's a responsibility. Text 12b, even if a patient brought illness upon himself through negligence, the Sabbath must be desecrated on his behalf. A person might say, well, an argument can be made, well, the person has himself put himself in danger, physical danger, so why should you violate the Sabbath to help this guy out? You violate Shabbat, violate the Sabbath to help someone in grave danger. But what if they put themselves in danger? Is that a danger? It's like, I should break Shabbat because you acted recklessly. The answer is yes. That's how important life is. And that's how responsible we need to be for others, even when they set themselves up, God forbid, for negativity. So, text 13, if a stingy rich man starves himself, even though we should feel no charity obligation towards him and we allow him to go about in his foolishness, it seems to me that if he becomes ill from his hunger, we do feed him and force him to pay. So again, somebody is reckless and whatever, so you could say it's on him, but at the end of the day, if he gets really sick, it's on us. We still have to step up, no matter how foolish or how irresponsible they were. You can't say, well, now you're going to learn a lesson. You can't, that's not a kosher thing if they really get ill. You don't teach lessons at that time. You step up. Oh, and then you force them to pay. Now, I know what you're wondering. Force them to pay, like, what does that mean? Like, how actually does that happen? So I don't know actually the mechanism and what that would be, but it would be applying whatever pressure that we can. And I think if we were to summarize, skip discussion question for the interest of time, text 14, classic teaching of the Mishnah that has many different meanings, but in today's conversation, I think we can apply it in an interesting way. Hillel says, if I am not for myself, then who will be for me? But if I am for myself only, then what kind of person am I? And if not now, when? And now we can understand this in a bit of a unique light. Number one, let's start again. If I am not for myself, then who will be for me? My health, who's responsible for my health? I am, right? The buck stops here with me. I am responsible for my own health. However, the second point is if I'm for myself only, then what kind of person am I? At the same time that I'm responsible for me, I'm also ultimately responsible for you. And if not now, when? Which means it's a pressing thing that we have to take care of each other. We have to take care of ourselves. We shouldn't make ourselves be a burden on anyone else. If somebody is going through a difficult time, we do physically and otherwise, we need to step up. The first one to foot that bill would be the individual. If they can't, then it falls again on the collective. The person says, I opt out and I don't want, and I'm going to allow myself to get sick and whatever, God forbid, then we still intervene and we still try to extract the payment. And then if not, again, it becomes a communal responsibility. Now, text 4 is insurance. Okay, and this is the last section that we will cover tonight. And the question we're going to ask is because, of course, when it comes to questions of healthcare and insurance, one might ask the theological question, the religious question, perhaps, which is insurance even kosher? Because what does insurance say? Insurance says that I'm betting on something going wrong and I'm creating a mechanism to fix the problem, etc. And, I'm making a plan to cover things. And maybe I should rather have faith in God and not purchase insurance. Text 15a, verse from Psalms, cast your burdens on God. He will sustain you. He will never allow the righteous to stumble. Well, maybe I don't need insurance then. If I believe in God and if I do keep my end of the bargain, then maybe I should save the premiums because what could go wrong? Text 15b ratchets up the question by quoting Chovot Halavavot, Shar Bitachon, the gate of trust, which says the following, talks all about the mitzvah to trust in God, and says the following: if one does not trust in God, then one is trusting in something else, and one who trusts in something other than God removes God's protective governance from himself and is abandoned to the thing in which he puts his trust. Basically, it's an elaborate way of saying God says, oh, you don't need me? You got your own plan? Good luck. Great. You sure you're covered? You got it? You made a plan? You don't need me? I can go over the, sure. Own devices. Chovot Halavavot says it's a bad bet. Don't do that. Trust in God. You want God involved. You don't want God to check out by making other plans. So now the question is, what about insurance? Am I saying to God, it's good, I got this covered? Like, does that apply? So Rabbi Yonah Metzger, one of the chief rabbis of Israel back in the day, asked the following question, text 15c. Does insurance in all its forms not represent a lack of trust in God? The prophet Jeremiah said, cursed is the man who puts his trust in man, making flesh his might and pulls back his heart from God. If so, when I place my trust in the insurance company, perhaps this is a lack of faith in the blessed Holy One. Perhaps he's asking the question. Now, I mean, okay, the short answer is it's fine. But we're going to go through that journey very quickly and figure out why it's fine. Yeah.
Shalom.
Oh, Dassi's saying putting faith, trusting in God means I trust that the insurance company will pay when the claim is submitted. Correct.
Like shalom,
Right.
because you're said you have to eat hot food and cows, but you can't.
Right.
You're not talking about the care of the patient. You're talking about the payment and not the care of the patient.
Right. Yeah. Listen, you guys, you're all right. Let's read this inside. Let's see how it's formulated. The Sifri famously says, text 16, God will bless you. You might think that this would be so even if one were to sit and do nothing. Therefore, the text adds and continues in all that you do. God will bless you in all that you do means you have to make a plan. You can't just say, God will take care of it. You got to make a plan. Text 17, donkey drivers. Listen to the original form of insurance from the Talmud. Donkey drivers can say that whenever someone's donkey dies, all will collectively buy him a new donkey. They would all pay in to a fund. And then, I mean, listen, if all the donkeys died at the same time, that would be a crash that would tax the system. The whole pyramid scheme of the donkey insurance would come crashing down. So hopefully not all donkeys are dying at the same time. So they have their own insurance. And the implication from the Tosefta is that that's not a problem. That's not an issue. That is a good practice. This type of group insurance. I don't know what you would call this, donkey insurance. Text 18a. A person should never consecrate or devote all his possessions. That means donate. He who does the reverse acts contrary to the intention of Scripture. Such an act is not piety, but folly, since he forfeits all his valuables and makes himself dependent upon other people who may show no pity to him. But basically, Maimonides says even as you trust in God, you also have to make a plan. And that doesn't mean that you're not trusting God. It just means that you're doing what God wants, which is to be prudent. Text 18b, a man should always exert himself and should sooner endure hardship than throw himself as a dependent on the community. The sage admonished, make your Shabbat a weekday, which just means like you don't need the brisket, like peanut butter and jelly for Shabbat, like huh?
I thought it meant work if you have.
No, not that. It just means cut back on your expenses. Make your Shabbat a weekday rather than become dependent. By the way, you're right. It's interesting because you could read it that way also. But all the commentators say that's even one who is learned and honored should, if impoverished, work at various trades, even very lowly ones, rather than accept dependency. Again, Maimonides talking about the personal responsibility that we have to have. Text 19. Regarding the question, Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the great rabbis, Halachic experts of the modern era in the U.S., Lower East Side rabbi, regarding the question of whether there is any worry that is forbidden to take out an insurance policy, as it might constitute, God forbid, a lack of faith in God. In my humble opinion, says Rabbi Feinstein, there is not a bit of lack of faith in God in this, for it is like any other business matter in which a person is not only allowed, but required to engage in commerce and work for his livelihood, and it is forbidden for him to say, even if I do nothing, God will sustain me in some way. To say God will provide and do nothing is actually not what Judaism, not what faith entails. Faith is not about blindly sitting back and saying God will provide. It's rather about taking initiative. Insurance is another form of financial product that is the same thing. And of course, text number 20, just to close it out, I think we'll close it out with this one. A community can restrict, enact laws, and make agreements as they see fit. These have the strength of Torah laws. They can fine and punish anyone that violates any of their collective agreements, which means ultimately in the context of insurance that there may be an understanding that a community can gather together and say, hey, everyone has to pay into a collective fund that is going to cover things when the things arise. So like the donkey drivers get together and require that for that vocation, and the community on a larger scale, or maybe a smaller scale, depending on how many donkey drivers and or there are and how big the community is in a different community, the community can potentially theoretically require everyone to pay in and be covered. So in the final analysis, there's like section 5 about bad choices and overtaxing the system of insurance, and if insurance is subsidized, then people may take advantage of it and overburden the system and request healthcare even if they don't need it, and then that causes the whole system to collapse. In other words, it's like supply and demand, right? Not like it literally is supply and demand. If you make the supply, if you make it more accessible, then the flip side is that can also make it less accessible ultimately. So how do you balance that? And here we once again come back to the core of the matter. Judaism is not a system of rights; it's a system of responsibility, and therefore it tells the person: number 1, be a mensch. Be a mensch. Number 2, take responsibility. Number 3, if someone's in need, help them out. Number 4, if you were helped out, pay for it. Number 5, if you can't, then don't make one guy pay for it. Everyone should chip in and cover that burden. And number 6, you gotta use, I think we're up to 6 or not, whatever number I got up to. Bottom line, insurance is not against the divine will or the divine plan or intention for mankind. It is rather a valid product that can help when utilized in for lack of a better term, in a menschy fashion. So what does that mean? What does that mean? That means that ultimately we need to take responsibility. So for someone, if someone can, let's say a person says, I have plenty of money, I don't need to buy insurance. If something comes up, I'll cover it. Okay. So Torah would say that's fine, right? There was nothing anti-Torah about that. Person wants to cover it and be their own insurance policy. Sure, why not? But you got to take responsibility. You got to make sure that that's the case. Somebody can't at all afford anything. Okay, then that's where a kosher, Jewishly kosher community would say we have a provision to take care of those that can't, for whatever reason, unfortunately can't take care of themselves. That's every Jewish community has that. There are funds, institutions, organizations, etc., that help. And then number 3, the person in the middle, the person who can, let's say, pay an insurance premium, but can't put on their own a catastrophic expense. Their halacha I can't say definitively, may say to that person, one second. If God forbid X, Y, or Z were to happen, could you afford it? No. So what would happen then? You'd be forcing someone else to pay for it. That's not kosher. You're going to set yourself up to make someone else have to pay for you for something. How do you do that? Therefore, you have to take responsibility. And if that responsibility means that you pay a premium that you can afford on a monthly basis, well, then perhaps, I can't say for sure, perhaps halacha would say that becomes something that is perhaps binding. What does this mean for us? It means that when we establish these types of rules and regulations, it's about, perhaps Jewish values can guide us forward and take away some of the, I don't know what the right word is, some of the vitriol. That's right. Did I pronounce that? Vitriol? Yeah, it didn't come out. It didn't sound like it came out right. Vitriol, right? In the conversation, and make it more about the issues and less about the politics. And with that, I want to conclude with a blessing. That we all have good health. May we only need to see doctors for preventative well visits, as they say with the kids, right? The well visits. And may Hashem, indeed, the healer of all flesh, look after us and our loved ones from now and in the future. Let us say amen. Thank you for joining me tonight for lesson number 3, the healthcare debate. Hope you enjoyed it, and hope this has sparked some conversation and food for thought. Questions, comments? Feel free to jump in.
Yasher koach.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Bye.
Next week. Wait, what's the topic next week? Who remembers? What was lesson 4? Abortion. Yeah, I think so. Oh, I initially, listen to this, guys. Let me take you into my process. I think I may have said this even in one of the classes. put the economy as lesson one. And then I realized that I want more time to understand a little bit better because I don't know, because candidates change and platforms change. I want to know I want to get a better handle on what positions there are. So by lesson 5, I'm trying to kick out as long as I can. So lesson 5, we'll do economy. Lesson 4 next week is about abortion.
Before the debate. So we know how to.
Oh, debate is tomorrow night? Is that happening tomorrow night? Okay. Good. Is it tomorrow night? Okay. Well, all right, here we go. I'm sure the economy is going to come up. So we'll talk about the economy.
I'm sure abortion.
Oh, yes. Also, abortion will come 100%. It's going to come up. There's a lot to talk about. And we're going to have hopefully, again, a very productive conversation about that. Next week, same bat time, same bat channel. All right. Good stuff. Any questions? We have some questions here in person, but I want to check in online first. Everyone good? Larry, Joel, Dr. Maxie, Irene, Larry, Susan, Lisa, David. Good stuff. All right. Thumbs up from Dr. D. Oh, that's a vote of confidence right there. All right. Good stuff. See you guys.
Laila tov.
Laila tov. Take care, everybody.